If you want to leave the US but you're not sure what to do with your house, this video will help. I am a nationwide consultant to new landlords, so people hire me to teach them how to landlord. I've also written 3 books on the topic of landlording, but more important or relevant to your situation, I moved out of the United States in November of 2024, likely for the same reason that you're thinking about moving out now. So I can speak uniquely to the experience and to the fear of like, a lot is happening and you didn't necessarily see yourself being in these circumstances your whole life. You didn't see this coming, but now it's here and you're trying to reckon with what you should do with that information. And part of that, potentially a big part of that, has to do with your house. Like, what am I going to do with this house that I still have a mortgage on and everything else? You have 3 options, and I'm going to speak to those 3 options mapped against what I assume are your 2 goals. And the assumption I'm making around your goals is that you want it simplified because you have a lot to think about right now, and you want it to move fast. And the reason for that being that this particular process takes a lot of time and mental energy, and it's easy to get distracted, but you might also think, I kind of need to do this. So the quicker it moves, the more likely I am to do it. That's at least how I was thinking about it. So I will look at your 3 different options against those 2 goals, and hopefully that will help you come to a conclusion about what you should do or what your plan should be next. I will also speak to our experience after a year in Mexico at the end of this video, but I'm going to put it at the end. That way, if you're not interested, you don't have to go through that content and you can watch it if you are interested. I should also introduce myself. I am Erin Sredlin. Welcome here if you have never been here before. Also, I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm sorry we're all going through this, but it's time to stop ruminating and it's time to start having a plan. So with that in mind, let's get to my least favorite option. And the reason why it is my least favorite option, so option number 3, is because it has the worst alignment to the goals that we talked about. So ease of moving out of the country and also speed of moving out of the country. And what I'm talking about is something that I'm actually in the process of doing, but I am in the process of doing after I have lived in Mexico for a year. What is this thing I'm talking about? I am talking about selling your property. So there's a couple of reasons why selling your property is difficult. The first is that right now the market conditions just aren't great. So there are more sellers than there are buyers. Buyers are being really picky. Buyers are really worried about what's happening. So we're seeing the economy contract. And in particular markets, they're being hit even harder than the rest of the US. And so I'm talking about the Southeast United States and Arizona, places that have a lot of snowbirds or a lot of Canadian snowbirds. Those Canadians are now selling their places because they don't want to come back to the US, and also they're not renting their places. So this impacts both your ability to sell the property and also to rent the property because there's more properties for sale, and if you're trying to rent, there are also more landlords and fewer renters in those markets. And I'm only telling you that I'm selling my place because I don't want that to come up later, but I am selling one of my places right now, but that is after I have been in Mexico for a year, gotten my feet underneath me, and I'm comfortable with it. So now it's time to start dropping properties, or at least dropping one property. Now, when it comes to why I don't like selling for you right now, first, let's look at simplicity. So what I just covered speaks to part of the timeline. So if it's going to be harder to sell your place and it's going to take longer, that means the timeline is going to be extended. And then paired with that, selling your property is not easy. Let's say in a best case scenario, you have to get the yard done. You have to get the exterior painted. You have to get the interior painted. You have to figure out what to do with all of your stuff. That's not a small thing. It can either be Goodwill donations, a storage space, junk removal, etc. But that process alone could be really overwhelming for a lot of people. That said, there are options here, and there are times when you would sell. So I think you would sell if you feel like this is absolutely a permanent move. I think I kind of thought it was absolutely a permanent move, but I didn't think that I was ready to sell yet. And so I thought, okay, I'll just put it up as a rental, and we'll speak to that. That's the second option. But it was like, I'll put it up as a rental for right now because I'm just not like, the idea of moving to a different country and leaving my country under these circumstances and figuring out if my job is still going to work and everything else, like that's too much. So for right now, I'm just going to put the brakes on selling, and then I'll revisit it. And I am in the revisit period right now. I think for people wanting to leave the US and starting to take first steps, I think it's kind of smart to say, I'll revisit the house sale. unless you permanently want to leave, and then that makes sense. And some other factors to consider for selling your property are, one, if you have a really high mortgage on it and the rent is just never going to hit that mortgage, because right now for people that have higher interest rates, meaning that they've bought since late 2022 to now, the rents for the most part have not met those mortgages. So you may not have cash flow, which isn't the end of the world. But if you're like 1,000 in the hole on cash flow, that's a much bigger deal than if you're like 100 in the hole for cash flow. So if you have a really high mortgage and the rents are never going to hit it, that's one reason that you might want to get rid of it. The other is the permanence, which we've already talked about. And then the third reason would be you need the cash and you bought this place a long time ago, like 20 years ago, and you know that there's a ton of equity. And so if you sell it now, you'll have the equity and then you can use that to establish yourself in a different country. So selling makes sense if you fall under those categories. You have a really high interest rate, you bought a long time ago, or you think, hey, I am completely done with the United States. It's permanent. It's done. I'm out of here. Then you might want to sell. But that said, I think I'm completely done with the United States and I am selling and I'm a year out and I have no plans to come back to the United States to sell my property. I'm going to do it fully from here. Okay, so let's talk about our second option, which is renting out your property. And let's map that again against simplicity and against speed. So it is more simple in the sense that you don't have a transaction. You're not having to sell anything, and therefore you're not going to get caught up in the time frame of like getting it listed and all that stuff. You're going to have to do those things, but finding renters, in my opinion, goes much faster than selling a property right now. So if you're renting a property unfurnished, kind of the things that you're going to need to take care of that aren't simple and that also fall somewhat into the same category of the same kinds of things that you had to do with a sell, which are clear out the yard, potentially exterior paint, interior paint, figure out what to do with the property, get it cleaned, etc. So you have those, but also, in my opinion, you don't have to be as militant or as on top of these items when you are renting as you do when you are selling. So the renter pool, depending on how you price it, is going to have more forgiveness and more leeway on some of those items than the buyer pool is currently. So you have a more lax standard there. And then also from my experience, from the time you list your rental on a platform to the time that you get rented, it should take approximately 3 weeks. And that is 3 weeks to getting someone in the door and renting your property. Now, let me tell you about something that's actually happening in the market right now that is making this a little bit complicated as far as figuring out your pricing. And just so you guys know, I'll link to 2 different documents I have. One is how to set your rent, so to try to figure out what your rent and your budget will be. The second thing is just like a how-to checklist if you're thinking about selling your property. So something you could go through if you're a visual person or if you just like a checklist when you're trying to have this conversation. My husband and I went through this. It's a scary time and it's a stressful time and we were not fully aligned. So if you were doing this with someone else, a partner, children, family members, a friend, it might be worth going through this checklist and talking about it together and having something, again, to look at from someone that's done it. And both of those items are free, but it's just something. One is a simple budget that will help you set your rent. And the second is this checklist of like what to think about that will actually track pretty closely to this video. And you will find both of those pinned as the top comment of this video. Also, I'll put it in the description. It should take about 3 weeks from the time that you post it on a platform to when you have a renter in. And something that I think is important for you to know is that the window with which renters are renting is getting really small. It used to be like months out, and if it wasn't months out, that said something about the renter, but that's just not the case now. Now we are seeing shorter and shorter timelines of people renting, and in particular, as people are getting more concerned about the market, they also are moving much slower, which means they're moving much closer to the date of execution, meaning the date that they're going to move in, which can be challenging as someone that is putting up their property for rent, because it's like, how do I know what the price is and how do I know what kind of demand I have when I only have a week heads up before the renter shows up or 4 days before the renter shows up. So a test that you can do here is you can leave your property live on Zillow. You can't do it on Airbnb, but you can do it on Zillow. And if you're getting hung up for a minute, like, I wouldn't put my property on Airbnb, it's against my city's law, or I'm just not interested in that, we'll speak to it in a second. It is probably not illegal per your city. The code probably says you can't rent for 30 days or fewer, but it most likely does not say anything about Airbnb. It's that renting for 30 days or less that's a problem. Now, if you are in an HOA, that might be a different situation in that they might specifically list Airbnb, and they also might have a timeline that is longer than 30 days. But also, I made a short about this, and I was thinking after I made the short and I talk about the same issue like with the HOA, I think that if you were facing down them or your HOA, I would say your HOA is the lesser of those two threats, and I might just test it out. But also in my experience, I've found people rent for a lot longer than 30 days, 60 days, etc. So back to this test that you can do while you're prepping your place. So while you're cleaning up the yard and while you're getting the photos done and stuff, you could just put a test on Zillow. So act as if your place is up for rent, even though it's really not up for rent right now, and act as if they could rent it tomorrow. That way it eliminates the people that aren't going to come in for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's in front of the people that are ready to move right now. And so you have it listed, and then people will email you, and then you just email back and say, sorry, this is just a test. The rental actually is not available. I'm thinking it'll be available in a month. You're interested at that time, but it's not available right now. So that way you can play with your pricing a little bit with very little consequence. On Zillow, the algorithm is not going to punish you for declining requests the way it will on Airbnb. So in Airbnb, it's tied in. In Zillow, it's a completely separate entity, so you don't need to worry. You can do that test with limited consequence. Okay, so that's sort of the pricing if you're trying to figure out how to price the rental. But back to our goals. So simplicity and speed. So it's not overly simple. In both ways, it's a click less complicated and it's a click faster than selling, but it's not super fast and it's not super simple in that you still have to get the yard done. You have to get the paint done. You have to figure out what to do with your furniture. This all assumes you're renting it unfurnished. And then same with speed, although again, speed is going to go a lot faster here than it will if you're selling. A note before we move on to the third and final option, when it comes to rent, some universally bad advice that's gone around rental circles for a long time is that your place absolutely must cash flow. In my experience, and I have been an investor myself since 2014, and I work with a lot of investors, both in this capacity, and I used to be a real estate agent for investors. I feel like seasoned investors quickly stop caring about cash flow and they move much more to a position of appreciation and cash flow. Your top concerns are probably much more like, what country am I going to go to? Will I be able to work from that country? Will I be able to pay my bills? So the cash flow equation would only come in when you're thinking about paying your bills and like if you need cash flow for that. That's the only time when I think you should really be considering cash flow, because otherwise we're going to go for an appreciation play, or we're going to accept that maybe we don't cash flow at all. We might have to pay $90 out of pocket, but that's part of our fee to move to a different country and have our safety and see if we like it. So just think about it as a potential cost. And also, if you think she's crazy and she's giving me bad advice about losing cash flow, just think if you had a $3,000 property and you lost, so it will rent for $3,000 a month, and you're haggling with someone over $150, and if they don't pay that $150, you're going to be down to $28.50 a month, and you're gonna have to pay out of pocket $150. Well, if you missed 1 month's rent at $3,000, you would have to make up for it, meaning you'd have to get that rent for $150 more, and you would have to get that for 20 months straight to equal 1 month's rent that you lost at $3,000. So that is why I don't get very hung up on cash flow ever, but definitely not in this circumstance. Also, the market does not care what your mortgage is. I know that's hard to hear, but the market just doesn't. And there are very good, very reliable tools for figuring out what your rent should be, and those are Zillow. So you can just go into Zillow and see what they suggest rent-wise. You can also go to a site called rentometer.com. I think they basically do the same thing, and every time I run it, they are either exactly the same or they're like within $25 or $45 of one another. So again, not an amount that we particularly care about, but if you just have no idea where to start rent-wise, you can start with both of those websites and you can start there for free. Okay, with that, let's move to option number 3, which is the option James and I, so my husband and I, have taken. And then our final option is to rent long-term but furnished, meaning we are going to rent out a property for 30 days or more. And in my experience, usually much closer to like 3 or 4 months. So you'll have a handful of rentals over the year, like 3 months here, 4 months here. A lot of times you see people come in for like a month or two because they're not sure about their circumstances, and then they'll extend. That's very popular in this model. The reason why I'm defining that is because you can do it on Airbnb. And when I say Airbnb, a lot of people think, well, I'm not looking to do a short-term rental. That's not what I'm talking about either. I don't like short-term rentals. They're too much work and people are too demanding. So I'm only talking about Airbnb in the sense that you can put a long-term rental on Airbnb and rent it for longer than 30 days. But you can also do that on Zillow. Zillow actually has the option on there to rent a place furnished and also to set it up so you can rent for a month, 6 months, a year, or you can say like subleasing and then define the terms, I think, of how long you want to rent it. Just so you know, I set mine up for a month, and then that just usually gets someone in, and then you craft the lease around it. And on Airbnb, because this is also a huge fear for people, you have a rental agreement, which is very similar to a lease in that it is a contract. It has a beginning date, an end date. There's an address defined, and there's a certain amount of time that the person's going to rent and a certain amount of time that they're going to pay. So they more or less are the same. I've watched a couple of videos on the difference between a rental agreement and a rental lease, and all I can see is that a rental agreement is slightly more flexible and typically for shorter time frames. So James and I went with the furnished long-term rental route, and that is because of simplicity and speed. Part of the reason why renters love this model is the ease with which you can walk in and out. And in your circumstances as the landlord looking to leave the United States quickly, you also have the same ease, meaning you can walk out of the property and leave the utilities intact, leave the furniture there, have somewhere to come back to if you want. But you cater to renters that want a furnished property and for a longer period of time. And trust me, I've built an entire career and an entire channel around finding these people, renting to them, and it's easier than you think, and more people want these rentals than you would think. So simplicity is one thing, and then speed is the other thing. All of my numbers, all of that 3-week number, it all comes from these furnished rentals because that's my profession, and my specialty is that I rent to people and I work with people that are renting to people that want these furnished long-term properties. And I have found from the time that you list to the time that you get a tenant usually is around 3 weeks. And yes, you have to keep the utilities in your name. So you are going to still have to have a bank account in the United States. And yes, you are going to leave it furnished. And yes, on Airbnb, they don't require a deposit or a background check, which is very frightening for a lot of people, and understandably, but there's ways to vet around that. But this was the route James and I went, or this is the rental model. This is the option James and I went with for the first year, just to get established and figure out what we wanted to do in Mexico. Like, can we survive here? Do we like it here? Are we terribly homesick? Is the situation getting better in the United States? Would we potentially go back? And now I'm going to speak to our experience in Mexico and what that's been like. So if you don't care about it, this is the time to drop off. At the end of this, I am going to link to a video about how to set up on Zillow. So if you're curious and you're like, my interest is piqued, but that's going to be its own process. I have a lot of videos around that. And so because I think Zillow is a very popular website, and maybe the one you're thinking about, it's the one I'm linking to at the end of this video. All right, so now that we have been here for a year, I will speak to our biggest rose, my biggest thorn, meaning my most positive experience, my most negative experience. But let me start with a story. So about 2 months ago, we were driving down the coast. We'd taken the day off. The sun was setting, and I made a declaration. And after the fact, I thought, was that hyperbole? I'm kind of an impulsive person. Did I just say that off the cuff? But I don't really mean it. And I've given it a lot of thought, and I've kind of stress tested it for the last 2 months. And I don't think it was hyperbole, and I don't think that it was just an impulsive statement. I did mean it, and I know that because I still feel that way 2 months in, and I've been feeling that way for the last 12 months. And what I said was, this is the best year of my life. If you are really scared right now and you have all these decisions to make, you might also be very worried about what the other side of it looks like for you. Like, you're in a situation and you want to get out of it. Like I remember having a job that I hated, but it didn't mean that I knew where to go or what was like I was going to be happier somewhere else. I just knew that I was unhappy there. And right now, you might just be feeling like, I don't know if it's going to work out for me or be any better anywhere else. I just know that I'm scared and worried and things aren't going great right now. So I share that with you, that this has been the best year of my life, to say there is a good chance that it could be a great year for you once you land wherever you land. I'll actually start with my thorn, which I've already touched on, but I think it's something that people, I certainly didn't see it in my research. You hear about it amongst other couples down here, that fleeing your country and feeling like a refugee outside of your country and going to a new country because you are worried about the government is quite a stressful situation to go through as a couple. And there's a lot of conflict that comes out of that. And so my husband and I mean, it could be my rose as well. I'm really proud of us that we got to the other side of it and that we communicated well and that we kept our shit together pretty well. But we definitely fought a lot this year, and there was a lot of stress on our relationship this year. And that is also true for a lot of expats. So that is my thorn, is just that, it's a tough time and tough conversations come out of that. My rose is that I was really worried, and I think he was really worried. I actually think it was his biggest fear, which is that if we land here, are we going to have any community? Are we going to have any friends? I think I was less worried about this because when I was younger, I did a study abroad. And then when I graduated college, I moved to Alaska and was a kayak guide for 6 months. And the reason why that's relevant is because in both of those scenarios, just like this scenario, you have a community of other people that are in the same boat as you. They're from somewhere else and their culture is somewhere else. And they move to a new country or a new set of circumstances. And you just kind of find other people like you and have automatic friends. So it actually has not been hard at all to make friends. It's been easier to make friends here than it was at home. And it is also worth noting, because I think that sounds like, well, great, you left America just to create America somewhere else. That's not exactly true. And on an end note, yes, learning Spanish has been challenging. It's a goal worth pursuing, but it is not an easy goal. And I've spent a lot of time studying Spanish, and I think I'm okay at it. I think my husband is excellent in Spanish, but that's very hard. And then the other thing I'd say is that Mexico and the Mexican people couldn't be nicer.